podcast is part of the BombPod Media Network.
Statements and opinions by guests of Mysterious Radio are not to be considered as endorsed by sponsors or affiliated networks. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this podcast without the express written consent of Mysterious Radio is strictly prohibited.
Get ready for a night filled with conspiracies, strange places, the paranormal, UFOs, legends, and myths from around the world. With your hosts, K-Town, on Mysterious Radio.
All right, thank you for joining me tonight on Mysterious Radio. I'm your host, K-Town, and if you're a newbie to this show, I want to welcome you, and those returning, thank you very much for your continued loyalty and support. I have a big announcement, and then I have a killer show for you tonight. But first, for my big announcement, we are officially over at Patreon. This is awesome because we are going to be able to reward our fans for accessing the extra content and extra editions that we produce for you every month. By becoming a Patreon supporter of Mysterious Radio, you will be rewarded for that. Did you just hear me? You will be rewarded. Patreon is used by people all over the world that want to support their favorite podcast by making a pledge and then being rewarded for supporting the show. Now listen to this. Patreon also allows us to set up different rewards depending on which level of support you choose. Our levels go as follows. We have the hybrids, and they get 10 different rewards from us. The next level is the House of 1,000 Apparitions, and they get 14 different rewards from us. And the highest level is the Council of High Order. They get 17 rewards from us, including chatting with me, and I'm going to air some of that conversation at the beginning of the show, so that should be fun. Now, also, I have my current elite members. You will need to transfer over to Patreon, okay? Some of you have been doing that slowly but surely, but we need to get you guys transferred over ASAP. Now, if you have issues doing that, please reach out. I do not mind jumping on a call and helping you, but it's really easy. And we have links for you to click on to help you with that. And once we see that, what we're going to do is cancel your current account with us, and then you're good to go on Patreon, and you can still listen to those archives and exclusives. Another huge plus for moving to Patreon is that now you will be able to download our archives and exclusives, okay? You will be able to listen to these whenever you want, wherever you want. And I'm always adding more exclusive editions every month. I mean, these are really, really good shows. So to rack up rewards, you just need to go to mysteriousradio.com, and right there on the front page, you will see a blue lock. Click on that lock and it will take you straight to our Patreon page. And there you can choose your level, and then you're in to listen to whatever you want. And by the way, I have a show coming up on the Las Vegas shooting, and that will only be for Patreon supporters. Trust me, that one's going to be crazy, crazy good. All right, for our special guest tonight, it is my pleasure to bring you for the very first time on Mysterious Radio, the great Linda Moulton Howe. She's going to discuss the ongoing discovery of cattle mutilations and the UFO phenomena. Linda is an Emmy Award-winning journalist and one of the few who are still out there putting in the shoe leather to cover these kinds of stories. She's as serious as it gets. This kind of interview here is the kind that I drool over because she knows so much and she's so matter of fact, and I love that. And I can't even begin to tell you how excited I am to bring her to my family of listeners. I really hope you enjoy this. All right, coming up, I have dedications, and then it's Linda Moulton Howe when we return right after this. Okay, and now for dedications to my Patreon supporters. These people will be recognized every week. And for the hybrids, I have Paul Wheeler, Corey Wallace, Lori Rhodes, Julie Crow, David Crabtree, Kara Tabalt, Robert Carrasco, Lindsay Blunt, Lily Rabin, Cody Allison, and Cheryl Robertson. And for the House of 1,000 Apparitions, I have Natalie Wood. And then for the Council of High Order, I have Annette Wingad, Angie McCulick, and John Thorstrup. I hope I said those names correctly, and if I didn't, please forgive me. All of you have my deepest gratitude for being our Patreon supporters. All right, let's get to it. I have an amazing show just for you. Linda Moulton Howe is a graduate of Stanford University with a master's degree in communication. She has received local, national, and international awards, including 3 regional Emmys and a National Emmy nomination for her productions concerning science, medicine, and the environment. Tonight, we talk to her about the documentary that she produced called A Strange Harvest that explored the worldwide animal mutilation mystery and whether an alien presence is behind it all. Welcome, Linda Moulton Howe. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce my special guest, the great Emmy Award-winning journalist, Linda Moulton Howe, and she's going to discuss her incredible work and investigations. Linda, I want to thank you very much for joining me tonight on Mysterious Radio.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for trying to focus on subjects that I know are real, have forensic evidence, but we're living on a planet where governments since World War II, including our own, have had policies of denials, which is a nice way of saying lies, about truths that they know concerning other intelligences interacting with our planet.
I agree, Linda, and I'm glad to have you tonight on the show. Now, I'm sure many of my listeners know who you are, but for those that don't, can you tell us a little more about your work as a journalist, your career, and what was the catalyst that made you start to look at these issues of high strangeness very seriously?
Well, we have to go back to my graduate work at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, where I got a master's degree in communication, in which I was making films for 2 years and doing television. And my work was with the Stanford Medical Center and with the Stanford Linear Accelerator. In fact, my master's degree film was called A Picture Calculus, and it's hard to believe now. But then when I graduated in 1968 was the very first period of time that the Stanford Linear Accelerator was trying to adapt computers to do the laborious analysis of bombardments of electrons and protons and neutrons in the Stanford Linear Accelerator. And that is what I worked on. And when you go back to when I was age 4, asking my parents for a telescope, I have always been a person who loved the hard sciences, devoted my career in television and producing, writing, directing, editing, and reporting to, in the beginning, hard medical sciences and hard physical sciences. So with that as a background, I had been working first in Los Angeles at KNBC, reporting all kinds of subjects for news, and was married at the time, and my husband went to Boston to get a degree at Harvard. And I was hired by the ABC station to do all of their medical and science programming. and did that for 2 years, was a producer in the Station Peabody Award in Boston, which was a wonderful award. And then my husband received a job offer with Time Inc. to work in their video division, which was at the time located in Denver, Colorado. And so we moved to Denver, and it was so interesting that the CBS station, Channel 7 then, in 1976, I think it was, they had received information from WCVB in Boston, where I was producing all the medical programming, about a series that we were doing, and that Channel 7 wanted the medical programming. And they hear from me in Boston before we moved that I was looking to continue my producing career. And the general manager said, well, why should I buy the series from the ABC station in Boston if the producer is moving to Denver? I would rather hire you. So that's how I became director of special projects. And my assignment was to do 3 or 4 documentaries a year, live studio programs, and news segments on issues that were affecting the state of Colorado. And by the summer of 1979, after I had been there for 3 years with my family, there were headlines in all the media, television, radio, and newspapers about unusual animal deaths, no blood, no tracks. And what I realized, as somebody from outside of Colorado, that all of these stories were reporting that these strange bloodless animal mutilations had a history going back to at least the early 1960s, perhaps even into the 1950s. And I, as director of special projects, I said to myself, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. And I ended up learning that in August of 1979, that the brand new show 2020, that the executive producer had hired a man who often worked for me on my documentaries for a project that ABC was doing. And it turned out that because it was a crew member that worked for me that had done double duty there, that I learned that they had shot over 100,000 feet of double system film. Back then, people forget today with the ease of just turning on an iPhone. Back then, you had to have a cameraman running 16 millimeter celluloid film. You had to have an audio man who was running 1/4-inch tape in a Nagra that had crystal sync, and that's why we used clapsticks so that you could sync up your audio and your film. And I, as the producer, writer, director, editor, and reporter, we worked sort of as a ballet team, and our lives out in location depended upon our having a whole lot of what were called battery belts. The crew wore them, and they powered our camera and our Nagra. And what I learned that really got my attention was from my audio guy said that on this 2020 shoot, where they had shot 100,000 feet of film trying to find who was killing and mutilating animals all over the Midwest at that time, and they would go out in some sort of a truck, and the crew would get out. And the Mark O'Kane, who was my audio guy, said, Linda, you know what a stickler you are for me keeping my battery belts up. He said we would have them all night long charged, and we would be walking toward one of these dead animals, and we would get there and there'd be no charge in any of our batteries. Animal after animal, he said it became spooky and that the network was upset, and they ended up scrubbing the entire project. And when I heard they had scrubbed 100,000 feet of film, I called up New York, and I introduced myself as director of special projects at the CBS station and explained the story and said, what is the fate of all this film? And learned that they had scrubbed it. And the guy said to me, we're in the business of news, and we could never come up with a hard answer to what was mutilating these animals. Well, 9 months after that phone call and my going hundreds and hundreds of miles with my own crew, trying to get to the bottom of what was killing and mutilating without blood or tracks all of these animals that can be cattle, horses, pigs, goats, sheep, chickens, rabbits, foxes, deer, elk, and since the 80s, half cats, dogs. They've moved to domestic animals. And to give the audience who may not be familiar, the classic animal mutilation on the larger animals is you find the animal lying on a right or left side, and the sky-facing side of the body, always the sky-facing side, has the excisions. An ear, if it's the left ear, it's the left thigh, it's the left jaw, it can be, and the tongue is often removed deep in the throat to the point that we've been able to discover that the trachea has been removed deep in the throat as well. The genitals, male or female, are usually taken in some fashion, meaning the male can have penis and testicles removed in a very neat, clean, bloodless, only hide deep, not going into the muscles, not even excising the lumen tissue, which is the white, thin material that covers muscles. It will only go through the hide, removing the testicles and the penis, or testicles only, or penis only, or strips of flesh from the penis in an odd fashion, or one testicle from inside the sac of testicles without any excision of the testicle bag. The removal of testicles without any excision. And then in the rear of all of the animals, almost 90% of the time, the rectal tissue, male or female, is removed in a hole that by average is 6 to 7 inches in diameter and enters into the body cavity of the animal up to 14 inches. There's no tissue, there's no fluid, there's no blood. So that's sort of the classic. Now, tails. In about 20% of the cases over all of these years and the hundreds and hundreds that I've investigated, maybe 20% will have the tail removed right at the base of the spine in a very glossy and glassy looking, meaning if you could polish glass to a very high finish. This is what the tailbone looks like at the end, and the tail will be removed at the end of the tailbone. Then there are other mysterious removals of tissue that are worth noting. In case somebody listening knows of any cases like this, I would always like audiences to get in touch with me at my email is earthfiles@earthfiles.com. And my website is www.earthfiles.com, where there are literally 200 or 300 cases with maps, hundreds and hundreds of photographs in the Real X-Files section of my Earth Files News. And some of the unusual removals are dew claws. The dew claw is above, let's say, the hoof of a horse, or up above the hoof of a cow. Okay. And a dew claw, when you see them, they are almost always removed like you had a special instrument that would go around the dew claw and take it out perfectly, leaving absolutely no trace of the dew claw and leaving a perfect, bloodless, dry hole, or holes, depending upon whether both or multiple dew claws are taken. Another thing that people don't know about, but law enforcement and I and a couple of others, we have usually kept these details away from the public, but I frankly think everybody should know because it's part of how anomalous these are. the molars, one or two in the jaw teeth, lower jaw teeth of cows, have been removed enough so that I have had discussions about the removal of the teeth from people like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Calgary or in other provinces in Canada, and they have kept this particular detail from the public as well. But the removal of the teeth from the jaw so cleanly that you can hardly believe that what you're looking at is a jaw that in which every piece of muscle and collagen has been removed so that the bone looks like it has been bleached in the sun. Cartilage is what I meant, cartilage and muscle.
Okay.
Then when you get to the whole issue of how does a 1,700-pound pregnant cow or a 2,000-pound bull end up in this classic pattern of excisions, lying on face powder like dust, and there is not a single track around these mutilated bodies, not even their own hooves. And that's why law enforcement in the 1960s, they knew that they were dealing with something, and they all talked about it among themselves and not to the public and not to the media, that whatever was doing the animal mutilations without blood and without tracks had to have some way of lifting the animals up into the sky and then lowering them back down to the ground, to the place where they are found in place on dusty ground with no tracks around them. And that is one of the reasons why I dedicated my first book, An Alien Harvest, to law enforcement who looked to the sky and they knew that they were dealing with something. As they said, the perpetrators are creatures from outer space. Now, the first time I heard that sentence was from a Sheriff Tex Graves. He had just retired from about a quarter of a century in the Logan County, Colorado Sheriff's Office, a wonderful person. And he had been dealing with large, mostly cattle and horses, but he had dealt with a range of animals too. And when I started my first research, he was one of the sheriffs that everybody said, you have to go and talk with Sheriff Tex Graves. And so it was a day in September of 1979. I drove 2.5 hours from my office in Denver up to Sterling. And he had a box with 266, as I recall counting, color Polaroid photos that he, as sheriff, had taken of bloodless animal mutilations. And there was one particular set of Polaroids that was haunting and eerie and is to this day. And I pulled those Polaroids out of laying them all out on his floor with his permission to look at them and to put them in a chronological order. And I asked the sheriff, what was this large black steer doing with its 4 legs out perfectly and on very dry, dusty ground and no tracks, but the head was in a hole. So if you can imagine looking at these Polaroid photographs, that the head is down in a hole and the rest of the body is perfectly flat. The legs are together on ground where tracks of anything would have been noticeable, and there was nothing. And the sheriff said, well, when the deputy and I started approaching this animal, I said to the deputy, hold off. Let's walk around the body about 12 feet from it. Let's not get our feet mixed up with anything here. And as they did a circle together, 12 feet or so from this steer, they took these Polaroid photos. And then when they got up close, after they had taken the photographs showing the completely immaculate ground, the sheriff said they took out a measurer and they measured that the hole that the steer's head was in measured 8 inches down. And the sheriff said, The only thing we could figure, Linda, is that whatever did this had the ability to paralyze this animal, keep it in place, but allowed it to move its head in the agony of the removal of its ear, eye, tongue, the genitals, and the rectum. And he said, and so, from our point of view, this was either an experiment or an act of terrible cruelty. I've never forgotten that. And I said to the sheriff, and I remember this so specifically, at the beginning of all of this in 1979, 38 years ago, Sheriff, as I have looked at these 266 Polaroid photos, I keep having this impression of something that is flaunting its ability to do all of this, and humans can't catch anything. They can't imagine how to do this. And the sheriff then told me the most amazing of his own personal experiences with a veterinarian. And what I'm going to tell you now has been duplicated half a dozen times in my research over the last 38 years. And it is the period on the end of the sentence that when law enforcement say they know, are convinced that the perpetrators are creatures from outer space with technologies we don't have, and the abilities to beam animals up in a technology and beam the animals back down, you will understand why law enforcement was saying this as far back as the 60s. Sheriff Tex Graves said it was around the year 72 or 73, and it was his first animal mutilation. And he asked a veterinarian from Sterling, Colorado, to go with him to the field because he wanted to do a necropsy on this animal right there in the field and not waste time getting it back to a laboratory so that vital processes and metabolisms in the animal might confuse things. So the veterinarian started right away, and I've done this with a veterinarian myself in the field. It takes about 4 hours. They take an animal apart the way men will take apart or did take apart car engines. It's very methodical. It's very organized. They take apart the animal in a very systematic way. And this veterinarian was in the process of doing that when Sheriff Graves said, the vet looked up at him and said, "Sheriff, I want you to see something." And the sheriff said he leaned over into what was the chest area of this cow. And the veterinarian had on a gloved hand and was lifting up what looked like shiny tissue. And the sheriff didn't know what it was. And the veterinarian said, "What I have over my index finger is the pericardium. It's a translucent membrane, and it should be surrounding the heart of this cow. But Sheriff, take a look. There is no heart in this chest. I have my index finger underneath the pericardium to show you it should surround the 7 by 9 by 11 inch normal average heart. But Sheriff, not only is the pericardium collapsed in the chest with no heart, there is no hole, no excision of any kind in this pericardium. So the first question is, how in the world did anything get the large cow heart out of the inside of this pericardium? The second big question is, how would anything take out the heart and not have any clotted blood anywhere in the chest? There's no blood, no fluid in the pericardium, and I cannot find the residue of any clotted blood in the arterial or the venous system that should have been coming into the heart." And at that point, the sheriff said, I was stunned. I heard the words he was telling me, and I was astounded. And then the sheriff said that the vet stood up and said, "Don't ever call me out on another one of these mutilations, because I refuse to stand up in front of a pack of reporters with their cameras running and tell them there is no earthly possible way that any of this could be done by humans." And that set the whole track of my continuing for the next 9 months, 18 hours a day. There was no let up. I was caught up in the mystery and the law enforcement telling me off the record that the perpetrators were creatures from outer space. Not one single law enforcement would stand up in front of my TV camera and tell me that until Lou Girotto. It was toward the end of October, so we'd been in production for about 4 weeks. The crew and I have been on the road. We have been going everywhere in Wyoming, in Colorado, in New Mexico, surrounding regions. And I knew that in an area between Walsenburg, Trinidad, Colorado, and Raton, New Mexico, kind of a triangular area of those two states, that there had been dozens and dozens of fresh mutilations in about a year or so. And I really wanted to talk with a man who was sheriff he became sheriff, but he was the district attorney's investigator of animal mutilations down in Trinidad, Colorado. And the crew and I had been working our way down to go there and then go into New Mexico. And I had been trying to get a hold of then DA investigator Lou Girotto, and he was constantly out in the field having to do with investigations of mutilations. And finally, he said, if your crew can get to my office in Trinidad at 10 p.m. and gave me a date, he said, I'll talk to you. And we were there with the camera running on the record when I asked him, who or what do you think is killing and mutilating all of these animals without blood or tracks? Mm-hmm. And he answered, well, investigators and I have come to the conclusion that we're dealing with creatures from outer space, and proceeded to give me all the reasons why on the record with the camera running. And it is one of the most important segments of the documentary that ended up in a 90-minute special on the CBS station that I called A Strange Harvest. Because from my point of view, as an investigative reporter and TV producer with a background at Stanford University and WCVB in Boston doing medical programming, doing physics programming, from scene to scene, site to site, offense report to offense report. It's a collection of tissue and organs that are removed. And that's why I called it A Strange Harvest. And after the broadcast, when I think back that the mail room at Channel 7 in Denver, they were bringing me 1 or 2 mail bags, the canvas mail bags that could hold hundreds of letters every day for 2 weeks after that broadcast. And when you remember back, the broadcast date was May 25th, 1980. The only communication that any of us had in any TV stations was a landline telephone. There were no computers, no iPhones, no emails. You did your work on a landline telephone or through typing letters. And the mail bags were filled with typed letters, but they were also filled with hundreds and hundreds of handwritten letters with hand drawings of various kinds of strange circular or disc or cigar-shaped craft that people were writing to me and saying, I saw your broadcast and I want you to know. And then it was another animal mutilation story having to do with them seeing craft over the pastures where they had mutilations. And I think it's significant to report that during those 9 months when I was producing A Strange Harvest, that I did talk with 2 or 3 ranchers who told me again, off the record, they would not stand up in front of my camera, that they had seen beams of glowing light come from round or disc-shaped glowing objects in the sky down into their pasture. Some had, of the 1 or 2, One man had seen I believe it was a cow, not a horse, come down in the beam to the ground, and it scared him so badly that he admitted, I could not go out into the pasture at night. Even though it's my animal and my pasture, I waited until the sun came up. And there, Linda, was a mutilated animal exactly where I saw the animal being lowered into the pasture. Another man had been out on his ranch, saw a beam come down from something glowing in the sky, and then saw an animal rising from his pasture. And the same thing, he said, it scared me to death. And he said, I waited until the sun came up in the morning and I went to where I saw the beam and the animal rising. And even though I saw it rising, there in my pasture was one of my own animals mutilated. In my book, An Alien Harvest, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volumes 1 and 2, there are 3 books that I did over a period from 1989 to 1998. They involved photographs, forensic, veterinarian, law enforcement, some whistleblowers that served in military or intel that have said to me in matter-of-fact terms, we know, and I'm giving you a quote, we know that extraterrestrial biological entities from someplace else in this universe have been interacting with planet Earth for millions of years, and that part of what they do is harvest genetic material from Earth life. And that is the strange harvest. And then 10 years later, when I did my first book, An Alien Harvest, I felt like I could, with good reason, with all the evidence in that first book, I could say what sheriffs had been telling me for the decade, that the perpetrators were creatures from outer space, and that this is an alien harvest, and that it relates to the human abduction syndrome of human beings around the planet that has probably also been going on for at least the length of time that Homo sapiens sapien has been a standing primate on this earth. And today, in 2017, I can say, I just am looking at my own headline. I did a radio broadcast about this a couple of weeks ago. Just since the fall of 2014 in the UK alone, and especially focused in an area that is around London, going south to Brighton and the Isle of Wight, which is going completely off the UK island, extending up to Manchester and as far as Scotland, going to as far as you can go to the east and the west in the UK. Some 350 animals ranging from cats cut in half, or their legs cut off, or paws cut off. They are found dismembered. Often, if let's say a person has had a cat and that it largely spends its life inside of a house, but that people not worrying about something taking their cat and cutting it in half until it happens in their area, and then they learn about it. So cats are often let out for an hour or two at night. And in this case, there have been several that they disappeared. They didn't come back in. And then a day or two later, in the neighbor's front or backyard, the front half or the back half of the missing cat is placed in such a way, everybody who's dealt with this around the world says the same thing. These half cats are laid in yards or on sidewalks to be found. And the first time that I started doing interviews about the half cats goes back into the 1990s. The New York Times had done a big article about half cat mutilated cats in California and in Toronto, Canada at the end of the 80s. but my first interviews were in the 90s. And I can still remember that the people who were losing the cats and finding the front or the back half, they were all saying the same thing. This is insidious. This is evil. This is something that wants humans to feel this horror, because one of the things on earth in every country, you don't have to speak the same language, every country around the world, people have pets that are cats. And so this strange bloodless, they are bloodless. I have had hundreds of photos of these cats. Worked with a veterinarian. I have worked with a professional pathologist and hematologist. And for people who are really interested, it's actually not gory. None of the mutilations are gory of the large animals, and they aren't really gory of the small animals, because it's the blood that makes scenes that humans relate to as gory. When you're dealing with pristine, bloodless cuts, it becomes eerie, it becomes spooky, and it also becomes a feeling that something evil is happening. I don't know, but I'm saying this is a part of this that is so difficult to accommodate, because we humans love dogs and cats. And when you're interviewing people who have had a cat that was inside of their house, and I'll give you perhaps the strangest, excuse me, it was a veterinarian in Austin, Texas. And he had personally been, he had been written about in Austin, Texas media as a veterinarian who had had several of the half-cut cats. This goes back about 2015, 2014. He had been interviewed by the media in Austin on his doing necropsies on a variety of these half-cats. And I had interviewed him for Coast to Coast and my news website, earthfiles.com. And he had told me about how he was finding the blood missing from the excisions and other anomalies. And then I think it was a phone call from his office. And they said, we can't believe it. But we'll just call him Dr. Smith for this interview. Dr. Smith has now found his own family's cat cut in half, the front half left in his front yard, the back half missing, just like all of the half cats that he has given his time, and he had contributed a lot because he felt so badly. And now it's his own cat. So they set up a time for me to call him. And his first words, Linda, he said, this is the strangest thing for me to be now examining my own cat that has been subjected to this. And he said, I want you to know, and this is at Earth Files, and it was reported on the radio then. He said, I'm examining my cat in disbelief at how clean the body is, how there's no organs hanging out, there is no fluid, there's no blood. And he's feeling the jawbone of the cat as he was feeling the body. And he said he realized that there was some kind of an indentation right where the jaw of the cat came together at the front, like the front bottom jaw.
Right.
And he said he got a magnifying glass and saw that it was small, about 1/8 of an inch wide. And he found a thin tube that he had that he could start. He wanted to see if he put something that was straight and stiff into that hole, where would that hole go? To his amazement, it continued on an angle through the bottom jaw, up through the bottom of the tongue, still on an angle coming out of the tongue, entering a hole that was in the roof of the mouth, and going through the sinus cavity and stopping at the brain matter. And the vet said, I don't even know how anything like this could be done, because this is a tunnel that went through flesh up to the brain. And he said, I got the microscope again and I looked. For this to happen, there should have been some sort of abrasion in the tissue of the brain. And he said there was nothing. There was no bleeding. There was no scratching. This tube went right to the brain and stopped. And he said, I have no idea what could do this. I do not know what instrument could do this. And he said, when you examine all of these animals as I have, in the bloodless conditions in which the front half of the cats in many conditions, and the same thing in Vancouver and Toronto, I've heard this, Falls Church, lots of places, that the veterinarian will put their hand up expecting that they will have tissue or some kind of matter from the neck down to the middle half of the animal. And it's totally empty. And he said, it's like picking up a hand puppet. Now, what would do this? Around the world, the cases of half cats go back to Toronto and London in the 1980s, spread out. I've had half cat cases now in almost probably half the states of the United States, concentration in Toronto, London, Sydney, Japan, Malaysia, and they're all handled the same. They all look the same when you get photos.
Well, let me ask you this. It's a mind-boggling phenomenon that no one has ever been able to solve. I want to know, has the government ever conducted an official investigation into these mutilations?
Harrison Schmitt, the U.S. Senator for the state of New Mexico, who had been an astronaut in the Apollo program, when he was senator, he was personally responsible for an official request to the Federal Bureau of Investigation to investigate animal mutilations. Governor Richard Lamb, the state of Colorado, he made an official request as the governor of a state for the federal government to investigate the animal mutilations. He was responsible for helping put out a large reward that went through the Cattlemen's Association. And one of the things for your audience to understand is that there have been large, multiple thousands of dollars of rewards in every state where repeating animal mutilations have been going on since the 1960s at least. I have a case that may fall in this category in Alabama, believe it or not, from the late 1950s, a radio newspaper that describes a cow being bloodlessly found with excisions that I think is in this category. Now, the idea that you combine the eyewitness testimony of sheriffs and ranchers about the beams, the photographic evidence of large animals lying on face powder dust with no tracks, not even their own hoofs. And then you combine that with the entire heart taken in formal veterinarian necropsies. They cannot find any heart tissue, no clotted blood, a pericardium that should surround the heart and has no hole in it. And then you go to the issue of the tail bone that is cut by an instrument that can leave the end of the tailbone this glossy, glass-like polish. You're dealing with heat of some sort. And then you have all of the veterinarian reports and pathology reports that I have in my books, my documentary, where they have officially determined that the excisions have been cut by an instrument that has cooked the collagen or cooked the hemoglobin. All of that together is a technology that defies human understanding. And that is the landscape of the planet of everything, the small animals, the large animals, going back to at least the early 60s for the large animals in terms of the public and the media reporting, and the half cats and half dogs and half foxes, half rabbits, monitor lizard, royal python snake, all cut without blood.
Now, this is interesting. One of my listeners wrote in to me and wanted to ask, have you ever had any reports of people being found in these same mutilated conditions and no explanation as to how it occurred?
It is a reasonable question. I ask it myself in the beginning. The best answer, and this is as honest as I can be, there might be half a dozen cases that I personally have investigated in which a human body, and there's only one that was female, the rest were male, might fall into the category of the bloodless excisions in the animal mutilations.
Oh, really? Okay.
If half a dozen in my investigations, and you weigh a half a dozen to, at this point, 38 years later, I literally have investigated hundreds and hundreds of animal mutilations, me alone. So the ratio of 5 or 6 humans that might fall in that category, I do not have proof, but they might, to hundreds and hundreds of large animals said to me on the face of it that the facts say that whatever is involved with the animal mutilations is making a distinction, that whatever they're doing, whatever this is, whether it is a harvest for genetic material to make things or the harvest of material for sustenance, that the animals on the planet serve their needs, and that a distinction is made about humans. And there's another reason for people listening who might be ranchers. I honestly do not know of a single case of the hundreds of ranchers that I've interviewed personally since 1979. I don't, even if they have seen a beam of light in their pasture, or even if they have seen anything that was in the sky that was moving, I don't know of any ranch family who has had anything happen to any of their family members at all, ever. And so again, it seems to me that something is making a distinction between the humans and the animals that humans raise and the animals that we are killing and eating on this planet every day by the 7.2 billion people who live on Earth.
All right, I'm talking to Emmy Award-winning journalist Linda Moulton Howe, and you can visit her website at earthfiles.com. I will have that up on the Mysterious Radio website as well, and I have more for you when we return right after this. All right, we are back. And now, Linda, let's talk about the UFO phenomenon, because I know you spent a lot of time investigating that as well. First, I want to ask you, have you had your own UFO sighting?
I have had a very dramatic sighting, and it was in Denver, Colorado, where I was working at Channel 7, where I did a strange harvest. But I did all kinds of programming. I did astronaut training in Colorado. I did an investigation of contaminated radioactive water in a suburb of Denver. I did kind of just a wide range of all kinds of subjects. So a strange harvest on the animal mutilations is the one that people know the most about because it continued to expand and be broadcast and seen by people everywhere. And today in 2017, I think my documentary, A Strange Harvest, has become sort of a classic. It's kind of famous about the animal mutilations. But the whole issue of seeing something that would fall into that category of an unidentified aerial phenomena or UFO was something that while we were working on A Strange Harvest, the crew and I did see very strange moving lights in the sky. And that's all we saw, meaning it could be cherry tomato red, move across the sky going the wrong direction from the stars, or we would see lights that would stop in the zenith and they would never move. So we had those kinds of experiences while I was doing the animal mutilation documentary. What I'm going to explain now happened in about 10, not quite 10 years later. It was 1986. And I had been at a large bank building, multiple story in Aurora, Colorado, for a meeting on doing another documentary. And it was about 6 o'clock, was the end of the day. And I came down steps out of doors, and my car was going to the west, and the mountains were a black silhouette against a beautiful orchid color. And I was thinking how beautiful it was. That is the only thought in my mind as I was walking. And on my right shoulder, at that time, I used to have a briefcase on kind of a strap that went down so the briefcase hung at my waist. And something made me spin on a dime so hard that that briefcase flew out and hit a car. I remember that distinctly. And instead of looking behind me, like somebody had crept up behind me, I looked straight up. And above me, taking up most of the sky, and I'm not exaggerating, from where I was in that parking lot, looking up, the entire sky above me was blocked by something that had the shape of a boomerang, but not a simple boomerang. I'm going back there in my mind right now. I am standing, looking up. I'm pretty sure my mouth was open in awe. And the front, we'll call it the front of the boomerang. Everybody knows that shape of the boomerangs that they throw in Australia. But now, go to the front, expand the front of the boomerang up 7, I counted them, 7 layers, like 7 decks, or like if you were in an apartment building that had 7 floors with 7 balconies. It had that look, that feeling of something balcony-ish, 7 layers in the front of what was a huge boomerang shape. Coming down the sides of the boomerang, every square inch seemed to be covered by shapes, large and small. And the interesting thing is, in my mind's eye, I see it right now. I went home and I tried to sketch it. The shapes were not geometries from here, from Earth. I don't know how to draw that which you don't comprehend. And then when you came to the back of these very large sides of the boomerang, it tapered And the ends, think of quartz crystals. Think of the facets of long, tall quartz crystals. They weren't translucent like a quartz crystal, but the shape at the end of the boomerang on both sides were like quartz crystals, faceted. It was outstanding, extraordinary, unique, and it began to dawn on me, this thing is so big, I could put my arms up and extend them about as far as I can reach, and it still wouldn't cover how big this thing was. And I became aware of not a sound, not a whisper, and that it was moving so slowly that I've often wondered, was that some kind of a projection? What was this? And there was not a single light of any kind on it. I could see it from the glowing orange mercury lights that covered this huge parking lot, and they were tall, and this thing was so low that it seemed to me that I was seeing this huge thing largely because of all of these bank parking lot lights. Well, when I got home, I sat down immediately and I drew it in a notebook, and I called a man who was working in a company in California, and they were making models. On purpose, they were trying to find out what the government of the United States had in its black secret drawing boards, and that it would make models and sell them as, here is the new advanced Aurora, whether it would be or not. But they did this for a living. So I called up, and I knew this man who was kind of a manager in this company. And I told him exactly what I just told you. And he said, no, that is not Aurora. That is not the Stealth. That is not anything that we are making terrestrially. I can guarantee you that, Linda. What you have just described is like the Hudson Valley UFOs, which between 1985 and 1987, there had been so many, several thousand eyewitness sightings, and a book was written about it with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was alive up till 86, and he had been, I think, asked to do a foreword on a book about all of these boomerang sightings, but they were in New York. I was in Colorado. So it means that the same phenomena, at least I can testify that I saw what they called the Hudson Valley UFOs, was in Colorado. What was it? Was there intelligent life forms in it? Was it some advanced drone? Was it a holographic three-dimensional projection to test human minds' reactions? I do not know, but that is without doubt what I've just described to you, the biggest, strangest, high strangeness object in the sky in my life.
Linda, that sounds a lot like the same type of craft that was witnessed in Phoenix, does it not?
Well, I investigated Phoenix. I went there. I interviewed people on the air the week end of all of the sightings. I was on Coast to Coast with Art Bell. I was really talking with a lot of eyewitnesses. And we'll call it the shapes, broke down in these categories. In the early part of the evening, around 7 p.m. Arizona time, there were multiple eyewitnesses to something that was estimated to be 2 miles long. I know that sounds outlandish, but there were many people who saw this, and they had good reason to estimate this length. 2 miles long, solid black, long rectangle in the sky, and that was 7 to about 7:30, 7:40 p.m. Then came what we'll call the arc of lights in downtown Phoenix that made all of the TV stations locally and then went across the United States and was on CNN and Fox and so forth. The arc of lights. And then I talked with a truck driver, I talked with other eyewitnesses that around 10 to 10:30, were huge orange globes. And the orange globes would move up and down and then stop in the sky. And a lot of them were over, excuse me, over Luke Air Force Base. Sorry. And that, sorry. And that the truck driver became so in kind of, what in the world? And he was seeing two, and the two big orange lights seemed to be very near Luke. He wondered if Luke was doing something, but other people saw those orange lights in that 10 to 10:30 time period. And so you could say for 3.5 hours, there were waves of different sightings, and that nothing, to my knowledge, anywhere from northern Arizona to the south was boomerang shaped. The 7 o'clock was the 2-mile long black triangle.
Okay, very good. Now, that was an incredible sighting. It really was. Now, have you ever directly interviewed anyone that says they were involved in government programs to back engineer these craft?
Many. And I can use that word very honestly. I have heard many facets of firsthand back engineering of extraterrestrial technology. I have reported dozens and dozens of such reports at earthfiles.com. One of the most famous, and I think one of the most important, was 2008. And this, I think it was 2007 to 2008. And these are the Dragonfly drones, as they were called. And one, sorry, it's fall, and I get allergies about this time, and it is so frustrating. If I take an allergy pill, I get sleepy, and if I don't take allergy pills at the fall, goldenrod and other stuff, then I end up having these coughs. So I apologize.
No, you're
but
fine.
Also,
you're fine.
So in the Dragonfly drone, one of the, I think, most important leaked documents was from a man who called himself simply Isaac. The short form is that in the 1980s, he worked for the Defense Department in an underground, huge laboratory operation in Palo Alto, California. He said from the street, it would look like a simple library in trees. And the truth was, that was just the entrance, that the facility was huge underground. And when you think of Palo Alto, where Stanford University is, where I did my graduate work, it's amazing how much of that the Department of Defense hides in plain sight. How did they build it? From where did they build it? I don't know, but I believe it was there. I have had other people who lived and worked in other corporations in the 1980s tell me, yes, we know about this particular Palo Alto laboratory. This man is telling you the truth, and that the document that he released to me and to Coast AM for us to put up, that goes through his own back engineering efforts, working with this large group on the Dragonfly drones can neutralize gravity, project three-dimensional holograms that the human mind cannot tell from the world around us. In other words, there could be a hologram projecting a tree, and you could be passing that tree on a block maybe for a year, and you would not know that the tree was a three-dimensional hologram that was downloading and uploading information to an alien intelligence. Okay, so three-dimensional holograms, uploading, downloading information, neutralizing gravity, and invisibility. The Dragonfly drones were famous in terms of the government whistleblower for being an extraterrestrial technology that could be in our skies, could have been in our skies for 5,000, 20,000 years. Humans would not see them unless the craft decided that they wanted to be seen then a frequency would change and they would become visible. Unless the frequency was changed, or our government experimenting with frequencies to see what is in our skies stumbled upon frequencies that they were projecting from Area 51 or China Lake or a number of places, and suddenly, for a period of time in 2007 to 2008, people in many different, I had 9 different states of eyewitnesses, would see an object that had a dragonfly drone shape would flicker into visibility, flicker out of visibility, into visibility, doing this flickering, and some would stay. And that this Isaac said this was exactly the program that he worked on, had the documents to show, sent us documents describing the government back engineering using the term commercial application research extraterrestrial technology, and they called it the CARET program, C-A-R-E-T, all caps. And this was their whole goal in the Department of Defense and these scientists working in Palo Alto, was to take the extraterrestrial technology that they had gained and to back engineer so that they could be inserted into the public and become commercial, and that the patents on whatever they back engineered that were extraterrestrial would then be American patents, and that this would be the best way to keep the ET technology out of the hands of our enemies and to keep the knowledge from the public, the media, and Congress.
Very good. Now, we always hear about the United States, but not very much about other countries. Have you seen any evidence that other countries have had some type of real interaction with ETs over the years?
The best story on that score I ever heard was from Scott Jones. He worked in Navy intelligence in the 60s to the 70s. He was hired as a Navy intel guy by Senator Claiborne Pell, and I believe the year of this trip, I believe, was 1974. Certainly it was in the early 70s, and I'm remembering it as 74. And Scott Jones was given the mission by the senator to go to China following the breakthrough trip of Richard M. Nixon sitting down with Mao. Remember that in the 60s? Yeah. And the idea was that about a decade or so after Nixon had been there, that Claiborne Pell wanted Navy intel operator Scott Jones to take a formal declaration from the Secretary of State's office in the United States and meet with people that would be assigned in the Chinese government with the goal that he would be shown if they had UFO craft, ET bodies, whatever they had that was related to aliens. Now, Scott Jones came back from that trip, and all anybody ever knew was simply that he had gone. There was no details until about the year 2006. That for the first time, Scott Jones was willing to talk with me on the record and then a couple of other people, and told me this. He said they had everything the world wants. They have craft, they have technologies that they've been working on back engineering, they have bodies that are preserved, they have artifacts, they have strange language, they have it all. And he said, upon seeing what the Chinese had, when I was getting ready to leave, and the people who were sort of, I guess, keeping him in place all the time and taking him to the airport, Scott Jones said, I said to my translator, would you please ask my political handler, you have all of the evidence that the whole world wants to see if we truly are not alone in the universe. Why are you not going to the planet and showing them what you, China, have? And Scott Jones said that after the translation, that the political handler put both of the palms of his hands together and bowed to Scott Jones. And when he rose back up from his bow, he said simply, "We are waiting for the United States to act." And I looked at Scott and I said, "Do you think that the implication of that is that Nixon made a deal with Mao Zedong? Is it possible that the real reason for Nixon's trip was to come up with some geopolitical agreement that the United States of America would be the dominant leader in all things related to the alien presence?" And Scott said, "I don't know, Linda. I really do not know."
Thank you for sharing that, Linda. Now, it is a fascinating story. I've always wondered if other countries were heavily involved like the United States. Now, do you believe the stories about Valiant Thor, who was supposed to be some type of humanoid that they said, or that he said, was from the interior of Venus, as told by Dr. Frank Stranges in his book, Stranger at the Pentagon, published in 1967?
I have read some of that book. I have talked with many, many people over the last 3 decades about that question. And the only way I can answer, because I really do try to live and do radio and TV by the rules of an investigative reporter, and that what I have talked to you about tonight is either my own firsthand experience, or that I have documents, photographs, even if I can't show everything, that I get DD-214s from the military people who come to me. I know where they served. I get as many certificates. I get as many work papers as possible, so that when I'm reporting, I'm dealing with people that I know, that I feel when I say in television or radio or at Earth Files, these are retired or active military, these are their ranks, this is what they did, this is where they served, and this is their high strangeness report. When it comes to the Val Thor story, I can't give anybody any proof, right? There's only what other people have said. Right. But a person that I did meet and talk to several times and respected very much his work as a remote viewer was Ingo Swann. Ingo Swann was very famous at the Stanford Research Institute. He was the most gifted of the remote viewers that were studied by people like Hal Puthoff and others. And Ingo Swann, in the decade before he passed, wrote a very interesting book that I would recommend to you and all of your listeners if you have not read it. It is called Penetration. In the book Penetration by Ingo Swann, he talks about his life as somebody who comes into high strangeness through government programs having to do with remote viewing that end up taking him into the Department of Defense Pentagon in Washington, D.C., to sit at a table with nothing but a number 2 pencil, lead pencil, and some papers to do remote viewing on. And finding that UFOs, discs, all of that come up in his remote viewing. And that ultimately, in this book, it is 2 blonde, blue-eyed, identical men working in the Pentagon who become his handlers in his remote viewing work, that he becomes convinced they are clones, they are androids, they are the property of something else more advanced, and that the blonde androids cloned or hybridized by an alien intelligence or several different competing alien intelligences explained for Ingo Swann who those blonde handlers were that handled him in the Pentagon and elsewhere, and that he is the guy who introduced that concept that there can be human-looking humans, but that they can be identical. And when they are identical, he was convinced they were cloned or hybridized by the competing extraterrestrial biological entities who interact with our planet now, who have bases on our planet now in 2017, and who have been interacting with planet Earth for literally millions of years. On that time scale, one man who worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency told me, looking straight in my eyes, Linda, our government has proof, and he used that word, has proof that 3 competing geopolitical, territorial, fighting with each other alien intelligences have been terraforming and harvesting genetic material from planet Earth for at least 270 million years. And when I said, sir, that's before the time of the dinosaurs, he took a beat, again looking straight in my eyes without hesitation, and he said, Linda, one of those 3 competing groups made the dinosaurs. They were an 85 million year long laboratory experiment. And he said, what we don't know is, did an asteroid is that really what was responsible for the end of the dinosaurs 65 million years ago that left that crater down in the Gulf of Mexico? Or did the aliens that set the dinosaurs in motion as a laboratory experiment on this planet, did they want to end their experiment? And were they the ones responsible for the so-called asteroid that ended up taking out 95% of life on Earth? And then what came next? Mammals. And what came out of mammals? The evolution of standing up primates, the earliest being Homo erectus 2 million years ago in Africa.
That is a very good question. Very, very good question. I've heard so many people question that now. Even when I was in school, I mean, that was what we believed, that an asteroid did that. So I'm glad you brought that up. So hopefully my listeners will go search that further. I do want to ask you this before we go. Now,
okay.
The government has executed to a T methods that are meant to confuse us, meant to make us feel like we would be ridiculed if we talked about it, and flat out killed our ability to discern what is and isn't real concerning UFOs. Now, people don't believe anything they see at this point. So essentially, the government could release very real video evidence at this point, and no one would believe it. How do we overcome what's been done to our psyche to get to the bottom of what's really going on, Linda?
They're really an excellent question. Right now, I'm going to say these words because I don't want to overstate it. I do think, and there are a few others of my colleagues that think, that there are back channel operations right now as we speak to open up in 2018, that we're not alone in this universe. They may do it through the fast radio bursts that even Harvard University is suggesting are the signals from light speed transports 3 billion light years from Earth. I'm not kidding. And it ranges from that coming through an astronomical breakthrough. Yes, we're not alone in the universe because there's advanced technology and we now have proof. All the way to a man named Tom DeLonge, who has been a rock star type in Blink 182 over the last 2 to 3 years, has been working his way with help from people in military and intel to use his 45-year-old self to reach the millennials on the fact that our planet has been a host to many different civilizations not from Earth, that through millions of years that there have been competing intelligences, that where they seem to be headed with this story is that in the process of not really evolution, but in manipulation of DNA on the planet, Homo sapien arose. And when Homo sapien came around about 25 to 35 or 40,000 years ago as one of many different models of standing up primates, that the non-humans involved with the earth and responsible for the manipulation of DNA in already evolving primates to create Homo sapien took the position with the dumb, blind, new Homo sapien sapien that lights, beams, shadows were all related to gods. And it wasn't true. But that humanity got down on their knees. And that one of the big difficulties now in 2017, 2018 is how to open up the truth that the Greeks were extraterrestrials based on this planet, that their precursors were the Anunnaki that dominated all of Mesopotamia, that the ancient aspects of pyramids as structures that provide energy and communication may be 500 million years old, with pyramid structures not only in our solar system but in other solar systems. And that the story is so much bigger than Earth and our solar system, that if we could just get past the lie that we're alone in the universe, if we could just open up the headlines, we are not alone. This universe is teeming with life in every nook and cranny. The remote viewers who work for the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA and the Stanford Research Institute, they all had remote viewed many, many other life forms in this universe. And that when people say, well, why hasn't SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence with its radio signals, contacted life? It's because radio frequencies are not the communication system to the rest of the universe. And that those life forms that have been on this planet for a very long time, mixing and matching genes and creating life and monitoring life and harvesting life, harvesting resources, harvesting gold, harvesting molybdenum, harvesting all kinds of things from the earth, that we have been a planet like a one-way trade route. And we, humans, have been kept in the dark. And everything in me, as an investigative reporter and somebody who likes facts and truth, all of the 7.2 billion and counting human beings on Earth deserve the honest answers from all of the governments about who we are in relationship to what made us, and are we free of alien manipulation? And if not, why not? And that is the bottom line today as we head into 2018. And I really thank you for allowing me to speak on Mysterious Radio.
It has been my pleasure, Linda. And why don't you tell my listeners real quick where they can find more information about you and your website, Earth Files?
Thank you. I have been producing earthfiles.com. Think of a reporter who files news about the Earth. I have been reporting in science, medicine, environment, and real X-Files, which are the reports that I have done about UFOs, ETs, and all things mysterious. I've been reporting since 1999 to 2017 and ongoing. There are now about nearly 2,600 reports there with 75,000 estimated photographs, documents, maps, illustrations. And I didn't realize when I started doing this that I would end up creating an encyclopedia that has become so invaluable to me that I hope it is to other people, because the numbers of reports of unique, absolutely unique to earthfiles.com reports that I have done in interviews with people, military intel, the abduction syndrome, scientists, and other, about this whole question of an alien presence on our planet, in our solar system, is now a huge part of earthfiles.com. And I would urge everybody listening to go to earthfiles.com and subscribe so you can have access to the real X-Files, which is where I keep all of the animal mutilations and the photographs and the documents that might be disturbing to some. So by subscribing, you give your permission to go and to see deeply these subjects that are not gory. They are eerie. And earthfiles.com, this is my center news by subscription news site. And now I'm also doing Earthfiles YouTube channel on a weekly basis on Wednesday evenings. And I am finding this to be a whole new and exciting way to communicate with a large and growing audience. So those are the two places to check in the most. And then at earthfiles.com, in the Earthfiles shop, my books and my videos that I have produced have been at the same prices in the Earthfiles shop for years. And I hear that Amazon.com and others are selling some of my work at hundreds of dollars. I have no idea how or why, because any of you can come to earthfiles.com, go to the Earthfiles shop, and all of my documentaries and books are there at the same price they have been for years. So thank you. I hope a lot of you will find earthfiles.com to be a valuable resource. And I hope and look forward to returning at some point to Mysterious Radio. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome, Linda. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. All right, that's it for tonight's edition. I want to thank the great Linda Moulton Howe for joining me tonight on Mysterious Radio. Now, if you enjoy these shows, get yourself some rewards by becoming a member of our Patreon. It's easy. Just go to mysteriousradio.com and click on that blue lock there from the home page. It will take you straight to our Patreon page, and you can choose what level you want to contribute and get yourself some killer rewards. And also, don't forget you can download our exclusive editions and archives and listen to those on the go. I want to thank my producer tonight, Kim, and the Mysterious Radio team, Jessica, Daniel, and Michelle. I am your host, K-Town, and I will see you next time on Mysterious Radio.
Like the show? Get more Mysterious Radio on our website. And don't forget to visit our Twitter and Facebook page.